Whew. Hey guys, so kind of just want to talk about what it's like being a first generation Fil-Am in America. Because definitely after traveling to the Philippines for the past year, I learned so much more about Philippine culture and heritage that I think my idea of what it means to be Filipino has been a lot more solidified. This is an important statement because it's important to know how I kind of grew up and what kind of background I had culturally. America is a country constituted of immigrants from all over the world. And when communities migrate, they want to form their own sense of community based off what they know best, which is your identity. When these communities migrate to America, they have very much still strong senses of themselves. And this isn't just based off China, but if you're European, this applies to you as well too. What I'm trying to get at is that when these communities migrate into a new country, their kids tend to have a very strong sense of identity of their ethnic background and their now American background that they get while growing up here. I grew up with a fairly large Filipino American community. I had a lot of Filipino American friends in high school, college, and even some in like middle school. And even my neighborhood that I lived in was pretty Filipino. In retrospect, growing up, if I could compare my Filipino American upbringing with my friends who were Chinese American or some European American, I don't know, something like that, it definitely seemed like their ties to their culture and sense of identity was a lot stronger than mine. One of my good friends from middle school or high school is Chinese American, and growing up he had a very strong sense of what cultural upbringings, traditions he grew up with, and being able to speak Mandarin or Cantonese to your mama or to your grandmother is something that would probably be common. But for me as a Fil-Am, I didn't really know much of these cultures or traditions outside of maybe like the ones that involve food. And if we look further back in terms of like Philippine history itself, we have Spanish influence, Chinese influence, American influence, some Japanese influence too, and then if we consider like the whole Muslim influence of the South, we have like a huge party of identity that we don't really know how to identify with. Growing up, being a Fil-Am was weird. I remember back in middle school and early high school when I would take tests, there would be a box where you fill out your ethnicity for, data census purposes. If they had the option of Asian or like Pacific Islander, I would definitely hesitate for a bit. I'm sure other people have felt this too, where they're like, I've been asking my Fil-Am friends, hey, do you put Asian or Pacific Islander? And I swear it's like always 50-50. Do I want to put this time or this time? Growing up as a Filipino American I would never ask my Filipino American friends what province their parents were from. Maybe if you're from Japan or China, you'll know if you're from like Sichuan or like Shanghai area or Beijing or Guangzhou. The chance that your kids would know where you're from, where your parents from, is like a lot more likely than if your Filipino American kids knew what province their parents came from. And so now that I've been there for a year, my mom's from Pangasinan, my dad's from Bulacan, and I've been there, I've seen their houses, and I've met my family there. And now that I'm back here in America, I definitely am curious to ask my friends what part of the Philippines their family is from. Maybe I've been there, maybe I haven't, and maybe by asking what's to do there or what food they have there can kind of inform me more about my greater Philippine heritage as a whole. The Philippines is difficult. Spanish for Filipino. And while it is something that's very beautiful to think about, it's also just really hard to navigate and understand and struggle with as you kind of grow up. Being Filipino American was hard. Very hard, and there's so much crises that we subconsciously ignore because of our history of colonization that makes it difficult to understand with what sort of cultural background to live with. Yeah, you occupy a very strange space, There is no Manila town. You'll find like Chinatown, Koreatown, Japantown, but I have not been to a place with a Manila town yet. There was such a strong pressure from my parents, and maybe you guys can feel this too, for us to integrate and assimilate into American culture and really prescribe our Philippine experience and culture only in the home or with our families. I remember my parents would always speak to me in Tagalog, my mother in Ilocano. While I can understand some now, and of course it's gotten better, I would always reply in English, and that Philippine language would only exist within the sphere of my home. Whereas if you're Chinese or Japanese, maybe you'll speak it with your friends or, to parents or your friends' parents, because there was more of a need to integrate it and keep it in your lives. Whereas for me, I knew like all my aunts and uncles could speak English pretty decently, and so the only time they wanted to speak Ilocano or Tagalog to each other was when they were talking shit about me. And it's not just language too, but like food wise, if you watch like the episode of Breakfast I posted, episode 7, on like why I didn't share my lunch in high school or middle school in general is because our food wasn't really like, in general, like I don't think any immigrant food would have been viewed as like really delicious or yummy or aesthetically beautiful, but especially for Filipino food that's kind of like soupy and like darkly colored, and it's not really that appealing as a kid growing up. You kind of push the dishes that we grew up with away, and that's like another symptom of it. So yeah, so growing up it was very much like a passive, on the back burner kind of cultural existence that definitely I don't think my Chinese friends experienced. So growing up as a Filipino American was confusing. I honestly can say that have lived there for a year, I feel a lot more connected and aware of what it means to be Filipino. And I'm really excited to go back because there's so much more that I want to learn. You can say this in science too, but the more that I know, the more that I feel like I don't know. And there's definitely so much more of the Philippines I want to understand and learn about and hear. I can't wait to go back. But on the contrary too, I'm also equally excited to just ask my friends from high school or middle school what province their parents came from, because maybe I've been there now and maybe I've heard something about the province that they grew up in. While the Filipino American experience is one of the most difficult in the sense of identity, where we pushed away our Philippine heritage and adopted or adapted to a more American one, which doesn't help when we're trying to navigate our identity in America as Filipino Americans or Chinese Americans, European Americans, etc. I think this cultural conflict of wanting to understand your roots is definitely something that's really important recently to a lot of millennials. Definitely have been aware of a lot of people trying to go back to their home countries to get a better sense of their heritage and traditions. This is me, this is mine. My name is Chad, the Filipino, and this was my experience growing up with a first-gen Filipino American.